I am pregnant. The words shattered the music. Every conversation inside the Royal Moon Hall stopped. Crystal glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. The orchestra fell silent before the final note could fade. Hundreds of noble wolves turned toward the great entrance. Lady Marissa Voss stood beneath the towering doors, one trembling hand resting protectively over her stomach. Beside her stood the royal physician. His face was pale, his voice carried across the vast hall. "My king." He lowered his head. "Congratulations. Lady Marissa is carrying your child." Silence, then chaos. The founder's banquet exploded into whispers. "The king's heir." Did he just say heir? What about Queen Ela? How could this happen? At the center of the hall, Alpha King Darian Nightfall stood motionless. Beside him, Queen Isla Everheart did not move. For 8 years they had stood together at every royal celebration. Together they had welcomed ambassadors, negotiated peace, opened new trade routes, rebuilt villages after floods and famine. The people saw a powerful king. Few noticed the woman who quietly made every triumph possible. Tonight, everyone was looking at her. Marissa's eyes filled with frightened tears. "I never wanted this to happen publicly." She looked around the crowded hall as frightened murmurs spread like wildfire. "I tried to tell His Majesty in private. But the physician insisted the pregnancy must be announced immediately." Several elders exchanged uneasy glances. The kingdom had waited years for a royal heir. Instead of celebration, the room felt ready to collapse. A young noblewoman whispered, "If the queen becomes angry..." Another answered, "Half the court will choose sides." Someone else muttered, "There could be civil unrest." No one noticed Darian take a single step forward, not toward his wife, toward Marissa. He gently placed himself between the frightened young woman and the restless crowd. His voice became firm. "No one will harm her." The hall grew quiet again. He looked around the room with the authority that had won wars. "I personally guarantee her safety." His hand rested briefly against Marissa's arm. "She and the child will remain under my protection." He meant every word. To Darian, this was not about choosing one woman over another. It was about protecting an innocent child from court politics. It was what any honorable alpha should have done. But in that single moment, he forgot someone. He never looked at Isla, not once. Not to reassure her, not to explain, not even to ask whether she was all right. His entire attention remained fixed on Marissa. The silence beside him became invisible. Only one person noticed. At the edge of the royal platform, Chancellor Aldrich quietly closed his eyes. He had served 3 generations of kings. He recognized disaster long before others did. Slowly, Ela lifted the crystal glass resting before her. Her movements remained perfectly graceful. Her smile appeared warm enough to calm the room. She raised the glass toward Marissa. "May the child grow healthy." Relief swept through the gathered nobles. The queen wasn't making a scene. No shouting, no accusations, no humiliation. The crisis appeared over. Several nobles even smiled nervously. "The queen understands. She's handling this with dignity. Thank the moon goddess." Only Chancellor Aldrich remained still, because he recognized that smile. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. It was acceptance. The quiet acceptance of someone who had just realized she had been standing alone for far longer than she wanted to admit. As applause slowly filled the banquet hall, Isla looked around the kingdom she had spent 8 years helping build, the merchants whose trade agreements she had negotiated, the village elders whose disputes she had quietly settled, the treasury she had rescued from bankruptcy, the alliances she had preserved through endless nights of careful diplomacy. No one would notice if she disappeared tonight. Not yet. But they would. Eventually. She gently set down her untouched glass. And somewhere deep inside her heart, before the music even began again, She had already decided that before another sunrise, she would no longer be queen, long after the banquet ended. The palace remained awake. Servants hurried through glittering corridors, clearing crystal glasses. Musicians packed away their instruments. Nobles lingered in quiet corners, whispering about Lady Marissa's pregnancy. No one noticed the queen walking alone. Ela crossed the eastern hallway without an escort. Every step echoed softly against polished marble floors she had chosen herself during the palace renovations years earlier. She paused outside the royal library. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Then she pushed the doors open. Moonlight spilled through towering windows onto shelves lined with thousands of books. This had always been her favorite room. Not because it was beautiful, because it was where kingdoms had been quietly saved. She walked toward the enormous map table at the center of the room. Every mark upon its surface carried a memory. Here, she had redrawn dangerous trade routes after pirates blocked the southern sea. There, she had negotiated safe mountain passages with rival packs before winter storms trapped entire villages. Along the western coast, tiny notes still marked the ports she had persuaded foreign merchants to trust. No historian would remember whose hand had drawn those lines. Only the results. She rested her fingertips against the worn wood. So many nights, she whispered, and no one ever knew. A bittersweet smile crossed her lips. She wasn't angry, only tired. Very, very tired. Leaving the library, she entered the treasury office. Neatly stacked ledgers filled the shelves from floor to ceiling. 8 years of careful planning, emergency grain reserves, scholarship funds, merchant partnerships, disaster relief accounts. Every system had been built to survive without constant attention. She ran one hand gently across the bindings. I hope I taught someone enough. The room offered no answer. At last, she returned to the lunar wing. The royal chambers were quiet. The fireplace had almost burned out. Her crown rested upon a velvet cushion beneath the portrait painted on the day of her coronation. She looked at it for several seconds. How strange. She had once believed becoming lunar would be the greatest honor of her life. Now, it felt surprisingly light. She lifted the moon crown carefully, not with bitterness, with gratitude. It was enough. She placed it back onto the cushion. Beside it, she removed every jewel that belonged to the crown. The sapphire necklace gifted after the Eastern Treaty. The diamond bracelets presented during the Harvest Jubilee. The royal signet ring that had sealed hundreds of agreements. One by one, they returned to the kingdom. Not to her. Finally, she opened a small cedar chest hidden beneath her wardrobe. Inside lay the only possessions she truly considered her own. A faded photograph of her parents, a simple leather journal, a weathered travel cloak she had worn before ever entering the palace. Nothing else. She folded each item with quiet care into a single traveling bag. No servant was summoned, no carriage prepared. She intended to leave exactly as she had entered Darian's life, without demanding anything. Before stepping out, she walked into Darian's private study. His desk remained covered with banquet documents. She placed one folded letter in the center. Its words were painfully brief. You chose to protect the future you could see, so I'll stop protecting the future you never noticed. She signed only her name. Nothing more. Before dawn. The palace gates opened for a lone traveler, wrapped in a plain grey cloak. The sleepy guards bowed respectfully, believing the woman before them was merely leaving on royal business. Neither recognized their queen. As the first rays of sunrise touched the palace towers, the lunar wing stood silent. The bed was neatly made. The wardrobe stood empty. The moon crown remained exactly where she had left it. And for the first time in 8 years, the kingdom awakened without Isla Everhart. No one yet understood that everything holding it together had quietly walked away before sunrise. At first, no one panicked. When Darian discovered the letter on his desk, he read it twice before setting it aside. He closed his eyes and sighed. She needs time. That was all he said. The council agreed. After what had happened at the founders' banquet, no one blamed the Queen for leaving the palace for a few days. Even Chancellor Aldrich remained silent, because deep inside, he feared Isla's. Words carried far more weight than the king realized. Days became weeks. Her chambers remained untouched. The moon crown still rested upon its velvet cushion. Fresh flowers continued arriving every morning, placed there by loyal servants who believed their queen would return at any moment. Darian threw himself into work. He expected routine to fill the emptiness. Instead, routine began collapsing around him. The first warning came from the southern ports. A fleet carrying valuable spices failed to arrive. Merchants demanded answers. The Minister of Trade stood before the throne looking helpless. The shipping agreement has expired. Darian frowned. Renew it. The minister lowered his eyes. We don't know the renewal terms. They were negotiated personally by Queen Isla. The king frowned, but waved it aside. Then negotiate new ones. 3 weeks later, another report arrived. The Eastern Border Alliance refused to send winter patrols. Their alpha claimed the old treaty no longer applied. Why? Darian demanded. The ambassador swallowed nervously. The agreement was based on a private understanding between Queen Isla and their Luna. There are no written records. Winter arrived early. Then came the third disaster. The royal granaries held barely half the grain expected for the season. The Minister of Agriculture looked close to panic. We planned distribution using reserve warehouses. Open them. We can't. Why not? No one knows where they are. Silence. What do you mean no one knows? The reserve locations were known only to Her Majesty. The council chamber grew unbearably quiet. Soon the problems came faster than anyone could solve them. Mining contracts expired. Road repairs stopped midway through construction. Foreign investors quietly withdrew their support. Village leaders rejected new tax policies, claiming the palace had broken long-standing promises. Every morning another crisis appeared. Every evening another solution failed. 1 month later, Chancellor Aldrich entered the throne room, carrying 12 enormous leather-bound ledgers. He placed them heavily across the council table. One after another, the sound echoed through the silent chamber. Darian looked at them with growing confusion. What are these? The kingdom. The Chancellor's voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. Or rather, the part of it Your Majesty never realized someone else was carrying. He opened the first ledger. Emergency grain reserves, every hidden storage location, every delivery schedule, every harvest projection, signed, Isla Everhart. The second, international trade agreements spanning 23 kingdoms, every negotiation personally recorded, signed, Isla Everhart. The third, mining partnerships, scholarship programs, village reconstruction funds, merchant guild investments, disaster relief plans. Each page bore the same elegant signature. Again, and again, and again. Darian turned the pages in stunned silence. He had known Isla worked tirelessly. He had admired her dedication, but he had never truly understood its scale. She hadn't merely advised the throne. She had quietly become the invisible foundation beneath it. The Chancellor closed the final ledger. Your Majesty, when people praised your reign, they were often praising work they never knew belonged to your queen. No one spoke. For a long time, Darian simply stared at the mountain of records before him. At last, he whispered the truth he had spent weeks refusing to face. I didn't only lose my wife. His voice cracked. I lost the person who knew how to keep this kingdom standing. Beyond the Western Sea, merchants had already begun whispering about a remarkable new nation where every problem seemed to find a solution before it became a crisis. Its name was spoken with growing admiration, the Everlight Dominion. No one in the throne room yet imagined who had built it. 7 years passed. The Alpha Kingdom survived, but it never truly recovered. Under Darian's rule, the nation became stable once again, yet the effortless prosperity people had once taken for granted was gone. Trade existed, but no longer flourished. Peace endured, but only after constant negotiation. The treasury remained solvent, yet every harvest felt like a victory wrestled from uncertainty, rather than a blessing secured through careful planning. Whenever ministers praised the king's improvements, Darian answered with the same quiet sentence, "We're rebuilding." He never added the words that always followed inside his heart. "We're rebuilding what she built." Meanwhile, across the Western Sea, another story unfolded. It began with merchants. A captain returned from an unfamiliar coast, carrying silk finer than anything woven in the Eastern kingdoms. Another brought rare medicines at fair prices. A third spoke of ports where no bribes were demanded before ships could dock. At first, people dismissed the stories. Every generation invented tales about some perfect kingdom hidden beyond the horizon, but the reports kept coming. Travelers described clean streets where orphan children attended school instead of begging for food. Widows received land instead of charity. Veterans found honorable work instead of forgotten corners in crowded cities. Taxes were transparent. Judges answered to written laws rather than noble families. Markets welcomed foreign traders without prejudice. People began calling the mysterious nation by a single name, the Everlight Dominion. No one seemed certain who ruled it. Some claimed an elderly emperor. Others whispered about a council of scholars. A few insisted the nation had no monarch at all. Then invitations arrived for the Continental Summit. Every ruler from every recognized kingdom received one. The summit would be hosted in Everlight itself. Its purpose was ambitious, a permanent trade alliance stretching across the continent. When Darian's ship entered Everlight Harbor, he understood immediately why merchants spoke of it with awe. The docks were immaculate. Workers unloaded cargo with astonishing efficiency. Children laughed openly while attending lessons beneath shaded courtyards. No beggars crowded the streets. No soldiers intimidated merchants. Everything moved with quiet purpose, not perfection. Organization, the kind built through years of patient leadership. The great assembly hall stood at the city's center. Its doors were crafted from polished white oak, trimmed with silver. Inside, rulers from every nation filled the chamber. As Darian took his place, he noticed something unusual. No throne stood at the front. Only a raised platform surrounded equally by every delegation. Whoever ruled Everlight clearly preferred partnership over spectacle. Then the ceremonial horn sounded. Every ruler rose. The towering golden doors slowly opened. A woman entered wearing flowing white and silver robes beneath an elegant imperial crown. She walked without guards, without unnecessary ceremony. Yet the entire hall instinctively straightened as she passed. Darian looked up casually. Then his breath caught. No, it couldn't be. The woman reached the center of the platform. She turned toward the gathered rulers. Calm grey eyes swept across the hall before finally resting on him. Recognition flickered gently within them. Nothing more. No triumph, no bitterness, only quiet acknowledgement. It was Isla, not Queen Isla, not Luna Isla. Empress Isla Everhart, the woman who had once managed one kingdom from the shadows, now ruled an empire built entirely from her own vision. As applause thundered through the hall, Darian remained frozen. For 7 years, he had searched for the woman he lost. He had expected to find someone healing, perhaps hiding. He had never imagined finding the most admired ruler on the continent. When the ceremony ended, he had only one thought. He had to speak with her, no matter how difficult the conversation would be. That evening, the harbour glowed beneath hundreds of lanterns. Ships from every nation rested peacefully along the docks, their banners swaying gently in the sea breeze. The Continental Summit had ended its first day with celebration. Music drifted through the imperial gardens. Foreign rulers exchanged stories over long banquet tables. Yet Darian heard none of it. His thoughts remained fixed on one person. He stood outside a quiet pavilion overlooking the water when an attendant approached. "Your Majesty." Darian turned. "Her Imperial Majesty will receive you now." He drew a slow breath and stepped inside. The pavilion was simple. No elaborate throne, no jeweled displays of power, only a polished wooden table, fresh tea, and open windows facing the sea. Isla stood beside the railing. The evening wind stirred the silver embroidery along her white robes. She looked peaceful, as though the years between them had become something she had already accepted. She turned as he entered. "Welcome, Darian." She still said his name. The realization struck him harder than he expected. He lowered his head. "I wasn't sure you'd agree to see me." She smiled politely. "You came as a fellow ruler. I owed you that courtesy." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different from the one they had shared years ago. This silence carried understanding rather than distance. At last, Darian broke it. "I've spent 7 years trying to repair my kingdom." "I know." Her answer came so gently that he looked up in surprise. "You know, I receive reports from every major trading nation." She smiled faintly. "You've made difficult reforms. You dissolved the old noble monopolies. You strengthened village councils. You protected merchant rights." She looked at him with quiet sincerity. "You've worked very hard." There was no mockery, only truth. Darian swallowed. "I should have listened to you long before you left." "You should have." "I was wrong." "You were." The words carried no anger, simply honesty. He stepped closer. "I never stopped loving you." For the first time, emotion flickered across Isla's face. She looked beyond him toward the harbour, where ships from dozens of kingdoms rested together in peace. "I believe you." Hope stirred inside him. Then she continued. "But love isn't what ended our marriage." His brow furrowed. "What did?" She turned to face him fully. "The weight." He stared at her. "For 8 years. I carried every crisis before it reached your desk. I remembered every treaty, every grain reserve, every merchant agreement, every village that needed help." She spoke calmly, not accusing, simply remembering. "And when something went wrong, I solved it before anyone else noticed." Darian lowered his eyes. She continued. "Do you know what I waited for?" He shook his head. "I waited for one day, when I wouldn't have to carry the kingdom by myself." A painful silence settled between them. "The banquet wasn't the reason I left." His head lifted in surprise. "It wasn't?" She smiled sadly. "No. It was simply the day I finally understood something." "What?" "That I had become invisible." She looked directly into his eyes. "When Lady Marissa announced her pregnancy, you immediately protected her, as you should have. She carried an innocent child." She paused, "but not once did you wonder who had spent years carrying you." The words landed with devastating clarity. Darian felt every defense disappear. "I didn't leave to punish you. I left because I finally realized no one should have to disappear inside a relationship just to keep it alive." Tears stung his eyes. "I'm sorry." I know. I would give anything to change that night. She smiled gently. I believe you. But some journeys aren't meant to lead us back. She looked around the thriving harbour. They're meant to lead us home. Darian followed her gaze. For the first time, he truly understood. She had not built Everlight to prove him wrong. She had built it because, at last, she had chosen not to leave the best parts of herself behind. Darian returned to the Alpha Kingdom with a silence unlike any he had carried before. Not the silence of denial, not the silence of wounded pride, the silence of a man who had finally seen himself clearly. As his ship disappeared from Everlight Harbour, he looked back one last time. The white towers of the Dominion glowed beneath the morning sun. He understood now that Isla had not become extraordinary after leaving him. She'd always been extraordinary. He had simply grown accustomed to letting her carry what he never bothered to notice. The journey home took 12 days. During every sunrise, he reread the notes he had taken after speaking with her. Not military plans, not trade agreements, just a single sentence he had written repeatedly across several pages. No one should have to disappear inside a relationship just to keep it alive. When he returned to the capital, the Royal Council expected reports about the summit. Instead, Darian opened the meeting with unexpected words. We begin again. The ministers exchanged puzzled glances. The old council system ends today. Several nobles immediately protested. Your Majesty! He raised one hand. The noble houses will no longer control every decision affecting the villages. Silence fell. From this day forward, elected village leaders will sit on the Royal Advisory Council. The Chancellor looked up in surprise. It was one of Isla's oldest proposals, a proposal the nobles had buried years ago. Darian continued. All charitable funds will become independent of political offices. No governor, no noble, no member of the crown, including the king, will be permitted to redirect money intended for widows, orphans, veterans, or disaster relief. Again, another of Ila's forgotten reforms. One by one he presented changes she had once quietly advocated. Transparent trade laws, public treasury reports, scholarships for children from poor villages, protections for small merchants against noble monopolies. Every reform strengthened ordinary people instead of powerful families. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Several influential nobles resigned in protest. Others attempted to block the legislation. For the first time in his reign, Darian refused to compromise. If these reforms threaten your influence, he said calmly, perhaps your influence was never serving the kingdom. Months passed, then years. Slowly, the Alpha Kingdom began changing. Markets stabilized, harvests became more reliable. Village councils trusted the crown again. Foreign merchants cautiously returned. The kingdom never became another Everlight. Darian never tried to imitate Isla's empire. Instead, he tried to become the kind of ruler who would have recognized her worth if given another chance. Whenever historians praised his transformation, they always asked the same question. What inspired these reforms? Darian never claimed credit. He always answered honestly, I didn't become a better king because I grew wiser. I became a better king because I finally understood the value of the woman I had spent years taking for granted. He insisted every major reform carry a note in the official archives recording where the original idea had come from. First proposed by Queen Isla Everhart during her years as Luna. Future generations would know the truth. The kingdom's renewal had begun long before anyone noticed. One autumn morning, Chancellor Aldrich entered the king's study, carrying a sealed invitation. The Everlight Dominion requests your presence. Darian accepted the letter. Inside was an invitation to sign what would become the greatest peace treaty in continental history. For the first time, he would stand beside Isla not as her husband, not as the man who had lost her, but as one ruler honoring another. And somewhere in the gathered crowd, a single question was waiting to reveal what Isla had truly taken when she walked away before sunrise. The great Hall of Concord had never held so many rulers. Kings from the northern mountains stood beside queens from the southern coast. Merchant republics, island kingdoms, ancient wolf packs. For the first time in recorded history, nearly every nation on the continent had gathered beneath one roof. Not for war, for peace. At the center of the hall rested a long table carved from a single white oak. Upon it lay the treaty that would unite generations through trade, mutual defense, and open borders. Two signatures remained: Alpha King Darian Nightfall, Empress Isla Everhard. When the herald announced their names, the crowd rose in respectful applause. 7 years earlier, they had stood together as husband and wife. Today, they stood beside one another as leaders whose kingdoms had earned the world's admiration for very different reasons. Darian signed first, then slid the treaty gently toward Isla. She read every page before placing her signature beneath his. The room erupted into applause, not because two former spouses had shared a stage, because two nations had chosen peace over pride. As the ceremony concluded, rulers gathered in small circles, discussing the agreement with hopeful excitement. Near one of the marble pillars, a young prince tugged gently on his tutor's sleeve. The boy couldn't have been older than 10. He looked toward Isla with wide eyes. "Master." The elderly tutor smiled. "Yes? Is it true that the Empress took everything from the Alpha King?" Several nearby, nobles overheard the question. The conversation around them grew quieter. The old tutor looked thoughtfully toward Darian, who stood speaking with foreign ambassadors only a short distance away. Then he knelt, so he could meet the young prince's eyes. "Oh." He smiled gently. "She certainly did." The boy frowned. "But she didn't take his crown." "No, she didn't. She didn't take his palace either." The tutor shook his head. "Or his wealth?" The prince looked confused. "Then what did she take?" The old man glanced toward Isla. She was speaking warmly with village delegates from 3 different nations. She greeted each one by name, remembered their children, asked about harvests in provinces most rulers couldn't even find on a map. Finally, the tutor answered. She took the wisdom that kept his kingdom alive. The loyalty ordinary people gladly gave her. The trust of merchants. The respect of neighboring rulers. The vision that turned problems into opportunities. He smiled softly. And when she left, she stopped giving those gifts to someone who never realized he was receiving them. The young prince slowly nodded. "So, she didn't steal anything?" "No." The tutor's eyes filled with quiet admiration. She simply stopped leaving the best parts of herself behind. Unbeknownst to them, Isla had heard every word. She paused for just a moment, then smiled to herself. Not because she enjoyed the praise, but because the old tutor understood something she had once struggled to explain. She had never walked away carrying revenge. She had walked away carrying herself. Across the hall, Darian watched her from a distance. Their eyes met briefly. He offered a small, respectful nod. She returned it. Nothing more was needed. Some stories did not end with reconciliation. They ended with understanding. And sometimes, that required even greater courage. As applause echoed once more through the great hall, scholars quietly wondered how history would remember the age they were witnessing. Years later, they would finally agree on the answer, not by the king who almost lost everything, but by the woman who proved that quiet strength could build an empire. Years after the Treaty of Concord was signed, the Everlight Dominion became more than the wealthiest nation on the continent. It became the place rulers visited when they wanted to learn how a kingdom should truly serve its people. Delegations arrived every season: young princes, future queens, village elders, merchants hoping to understand the secret behind Everlight's prosperity. Most expected to find hidden mines of gold or unmatched military strength. Instead, they found schools. Every child, whether born to a fisherman or a duke, learned beneath the same roof. They found hospitals where no patient was turned away because of empty pockets. They found ports where merchants paid the same fair taxes regardless of which kingdom they came from. Judges explained every ruling publicly so that justice could never hide behind privilege. There were no grand monuments celebrating Isla's victories. Whenever advisors suggested building statues in her honor, she always answered the same way. "If you have enough stone to build my likeness, you have enough stone to build another bridge." So the bridges were built. Roads connected forgotten mountain villages to busy trade cities. New irrigation canals transformed dry farmland into thriving harvests. Libraries opened in towns that had never owned more than a handful of books. Visitors slowly realized Everlight's greatest treasure was not its treasury, it was trust. People trusted their leaders, their neighbors, their laws. One afternoon, a young queen from a distant island asked Isla during a tour of the capital, "Your Imperial Majesty, how did you convince people to believe in your vision?" Isla smiled as she watched children playing beside a fountain. "I didn't ask them to believe in promises. I asked them to judge us by what we did." She pointed toward workers repairing the nearby road. Trust grows the same way gardens do. A little every day. It disappears just as quietly, if neglected. The young queen carefully wrote those words into her journal. At the Imperial Academy, future rulers studied what became known simply as the Everlight Principles. Listen before deciding. Protect the smallest voices first. Never build prosperity that depends on someone else's suffering. Leave every village stronger than you found it. Students memorized them, but Isla reminded them, principles are easy. Living them is the difficult part. As the years passed, artisans completed one final project in the capital. A magnificent white marble arch at the entrance to the Imperial Hall of State. Representatives from every allied kingdom attended its unveiling. Darien stood quietly among them. No longer burdened by regret alone, he had become one of Everlight's strongest allies. When the silk covering fell away, sunlight illuminated the words Isla had chosen. Never mistake someone's quiet loyalty for endless endurance. The day they leave, they may take with them everything you never realized they were carrying. The crowd remained silent. Every ruler understood that the inscription was larger than one marriage. It was a warning to every leader. Never assume the person quietly solving today's problems will always remain. Honor them while they are beside you, not after they have walked away. Later that evening, a young alpha heir approached the aging King Darien with one final question. His answer would become the last lesson future generations remembered. The years softened many things. The bitterness that had once lingered after the founder's banquet became a lesson instead of a wound. The kingdoms that had once competed for influence now traded openly across peaceful borders. Children grew up knowing Everlight and the Alpha Kingdom as trusted allies rather than distant rivals. Time healed nations. It did not erase memory. King Darien grew older, silver threaded through his dark hair. The strength that had once won battles now revealed itself in quieter ways. He listened longer before speaking. He asked more questions than he answered. Young rulers admired him for his wisdom. Only he knew how painfully that wisdom had been earned. Every spring, future Alpha heirs visited the Everlight Dominion before claiming their own thrones. They studied diplomacy, economics, justice, compassion. Their final lesson always ended beneath the white marble arch outside the Imperial Hall of State. They stood silently before the inscription. Never mistake someone's quiet loyalty for endless endurance. The day they leave, they may take with them everything you never realized they were carrying. One afternoon, after reading the words, a young Alpha approached Darian. "Your Majesty," Darian smiled. "Go ahead." The young ruler hesitated. "History says Empress Isla took everything from you." He looked genuinely puzzled. "But your kingdom still stands. You still wear your crown. You still rule. What exactly did you lose?" For a long moment, Darian looked toward the distant harbor, where ships from dozens of nations rested peacefully. Many of those trade routes existed because Isla had imagined them years before anyone else. Finally, he answered, "I thought another woman was carrying my future." His voice was calm. "I was wrong." He looked back at the young Alpha. "My future had been quietly standing beside me all along." The students remained perfectly still. Darian continued, "When Isla left, I didn't lose a queen. I lost the person who saw problems before they became disasters. The person who united enemies before they became armies. The person who remembered every forgotten village while I was busy looking at the capital." He smiled sadly. "She made leadership look effortless. I mistook that for ease." The young Alpha lowered his eyes. "I understand." Darian shook his head gently. "No, not yet. You'll understand the first time someone quietly carries your burdens without asking for recognition." He rested a hand on the student's shoulder. "When that day comes, thank them before they become tired. Not after." Later that evening, Darian walked alone through Everlight's gardens. Isla was there, speaking with a group of young scholars beneath blooming white trees. She looked up as he approached. Their eyes met. She smiled warmly, not with the affection of a wife, not with the distance of a stranger. With the quiet respect earned between two leaders who had both chosen growth over resentment. He returned the smile. Nothing more needed to be said. History remembered Darian as a capable and honorable king. It remembered Empress Isla Everheart as something rarer. The ruler who proved that compassion, wisdom, and vision could build an empire greater than any inherited crown. People once claimed she had taken everything from the Alpha King. They were right. Not because she stole his wealth. Not because she claimed his throne. She took the quiet brilliance that had held his kingdom together every single day. And when she finally gave those gifts to herself instead, the world discovered what greatness truly looked like.